Were you essentially a pop band at that time, or live, were you heavier?
Much louder than the records would lead you to suppose, which is why we spent 2 years, really, almost, in America, in the wilderness. I mean, our record company disappeared from underneath us. They went bankrupt. They were not just a record company, they contracted to make films and such. But Warner Brothers had done something like a contract with this company to produce films for them. And in order to get back that contract, Warner's had to buy this company because they didn't want this contract to make films going to just anybody.
Yeah.
So they bought the contract back, and in buying Tetragrammaton, they found that they'd bought an English rock band called Deep Purple. And I well remember them phoning our management in England and saying, what are you? And this is when the first success in England was just happening with Deep Purple in rock.
Yeah.
The first real taste of getting anywhere close in England. And they suddenly realised that they'd got a band that was having a hit in England, so they pulled all the stops and they flew us all to America to have discussions about, there's terribly sort of intense discussions that American record companies tend to have with their artists.
Yeah.
You know, how do you conceptualise this, John? Sorry?
Sorry?
I mean, God bless them. They were lovely. They were very kind to us through those early years in America with Warner Bros. They're extremely nice to us. But we, as I said, had 2 years in the wilderness. We were playing 500-seater clubs in America. And indeed, our first gig ever in America was opening for Cream on their farewell tour.
You were thrown off that tour, though, weren't you?
Yes, because we went down very well.
But also, I believe, or the stated reason is that you were thrown off that tour because Ritchie Blackmore used to play little bits of God Save the Queen or various other bits and pieces and funny other tunes in his long guitar solos that they thought, or Cream thought, was not giving credence to the music as it should have been given. In other words, he was taking the mickey.
I think he probably was. But, I mean, Deep Purple has always had I'm very pleased to say, a very well-developed sense of humour. We had to go through some of the things we went through. That could have been one of the reasons, Tommy, yes. I'm not at all sure that the miss of time come down when it, a bit when it comes to 1968. But I do remember we did 3 gigs with them, and for some reason we were elbowed off the tour, yeah.
How much classical music do you listen to now? Because you are a classically trained man, and you are, in actual fact, probably the most trained person in the band, academically.
Yeah, it doesn't actually make much more than a ha'porth of difference, really, except that I've got a few things to fall back on that perhaps some of the other members of the band haven't. Ritchie also has made himself very much aware of the tradition, particularly Bach. He's crazy for Johann Sebastian. Sorry, what was the question?
Do you still listen to classical music?
Yes, of course I do, yeah. I find it's a kind of a salve, it's a kind of a saviour.
Yeah.
Particularly on the road. If I sort of got back from the gig to the hotel room and I'm buzzing, after just coming back off stage in front of a lot of excited people, there's no real way I can get back into the hotel room and put Highway Star onto my, little portable stereo. It's got to be something that's going to help to calm me down. I can play for my own enjoyment and the enjoyment of my friends, but I wouldn't dare to go anywhere near the stage of the Albert Hall with a solo piano, or the festival hall. I mean, that's not the kind of quote-unquote classical musician I am.
Yeah, but one of your most famous albums, or one of your most dearly loved and respected albums, was put together in the Albert Hall.
Sure.
At a time when nobody thought a rock band could play with a symphony orchestra.
Yeah, and I was pleased to be able to prove that it could be done. But again, we're trying to have some fun. I'm trying to make some nice noises. To be given the symphony orchestra as a toy for a few days was glorious. the unfortunate thing is I was so scared I don't remember a thing about it. I mean, I have to play the album now to remember it. I was extremely frightened.
Yeah.
And it all came out of a casual conversation I had with this guy who made frocks. I'd say, he's going to love this. I just said, that to him in an idle moment, sometime in late 68 or early 69, I forget which, that I'd heard an album that the Dave Brubeck quartet had made with the New York Philharmonic, and that I would love to do that with a rock band, but that I didn't think that I'd ever been in a rock band that could handle it, and maybe this one could. And then in the July or whatever it was of that year, 69, Ian and Roger joined, Gillan and Glover, and he said, is this the band? And I just sort of went, yeah. And he went away and thought about it. And then he came back and said, do you still want to do that thing with an orchestra? I said, oh yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, great idea. I said, I've written a few ideas. And he said, well, you better get cracking because I've booked the Albert Hall for September the 29th. So, I mean, and Purple was working at a rate of knots at that time. So I was getting back from like Accrington to my flat in Fulham at like 4 in the morning and getting on burning the midnight oil with the score and
putting the dots down.
And books on orchestration, to tell me how to do it. But it worked in a very kind of off the wall and the grace of God and skin of your teeth, all those phrases. In that kind of way, it worked. You had to be there.
And it set a precedent.
Yeah. It did more than that, actually, for Purple. It attained for us enormous publicity, so that when the right album came out, the album that had been festering inside of us for 2 years, which was Deep Purple in Rock, which I still think is a classic album, because that's an album that sets a precedent. It made a statement about rock bands which hadn't been made before, I like to think. So that when that came out, the audience was there. They were intrigued enough, and it stayed on the charts for something like 56 weeks.
Yeah.
I learned an awful lot about why rock musicians are actually easier to deal with than orchestral musicians. I mean, they gave us such a hard time.
They thought you were weird.
I mean, Malcolm Arnold, the guy who conducted it, who a delightful man, one of England's actually best living composers. He doesn't do a lot, but if anyone's interested in modern English symphonic music, check out Malcolm Arnold. He's writing some glorious stuff. But he conducted it for us. And at one point, he stopped the whole rehearsal and said, listen, I've got to say something here, and it's going to make you very angry talking to the orchestra. He said, there are 5 guys here, only one of whom reads music. They are making you look like fools. So you better get your act together. And I can't tell you the way he put it. And there were a few ladies in the orchestra who were shocked by Mr. Arnold's language. But it worked, because you could see them going, oh, right, okay, if you're telling us that a bunch of long-haired rock and roll musicians are making us look fools, and then they started to work. Yeah. And indeed, at the end of the concert, when in backstage at the Albert Hall, when there was Euphoria Unlimited was happening back there, most, if not all, of the members of that huge orchestra managed to find their way to one or all of the members of the band and congratulate them. So and Sir William Walton actually was there, and he came back and congratulated us, which is a moment I shall remember.
One thing that's quite surprised me is looking down the list of writing credits, your actual writing involvement is frankly minimal. And I just wonder why you haven't had such a hand in writing
I'll give you a very quick and very honest answer. I got to Vermont with, I'd brought, bits and pieces, ragtag and bobtail stuff that I'd had trundling around the back corridors of my head for a while, things I thought might be useful. Ritchie arrived bursting at the seams with fabulous stuff, I just threw what I had away, Tommy. I mean, I'm not a proud man in that, on that level. I'm a proud man about what I play. But if I know that someone's written a better track than me, a better song idea than me, I'd rather see that on the album than a lame excuse for a track just to give me some money for publishing. And that's not what it's all about. You see, I believe very strongly that the Blackmore is the little microchip that when you plug it into the computer that's called Deep Purple, it makes it work. It's an amalgam of the 5 people. But if it didn't have Ritchie in it, it wouldn't be Deep Purple. That's why I still think that the real Deep Purple stopped when Ritchie left.
Yeah, but it's always said, always contended by people who've always loved Deep Purple, that it was the Mark II version that had the spark and the magic.
I wouldn't dare to fight that statement. To get back to your original question, was that Blackmore came bursting with great Purple ideas. He must have been saving them up for years, but so. I nearly swore, Tommy.
It would have been accepted if you had.
Yeah.
Of all the tracks that you recorded during the time that you weren't with Purple, and I'm asking everybody this same question, which one would you like me to play now? Which do you think is the definitive Jon Lord track?
Can I take it off my solo album? Because I think that says more about me in the intervening years than anything I did with Whitesnake. I refuse to denigrate Whitesnake. It was a great rock and roll band. But there's nothing in the Whitesnake canon that represents me, I think, as well as anything that was on the earlier Purple records or on my solo album. So I'm going to have to pick Bark Onto This, because it's something that I'd been desperate to do for years.